The cafe was loud in the way busy places usually are, cups clinking, espresso machines hissing, low conversations blending into background noise. Morning sunlight poured through the wide glass windows, casting warm reflections on polished tables. It felt like a place where nothing serious ever happened. A place where people came, paid, and left without remembering anyone else's face. That illusion broke the moment the manager raised his voice. "Hey, wait." The sound cut through the cafe like a blade. Conversations paused mid-sentence. A woman near the window stopped stirring her drink. A man scrolling his phone looked up, confused. At the counter stood a black man in his early 40s. He wore clean but simple clothes, dark jeans, a plain jacket, and well-kept shoes. Nothing about him demanded attention. That might have been the problem. "I asked you something," the manager said again, louder now. The man turned slowly, calm etched into his expression. His posture was relaxed, shoulders back, eyes steady. He didn't look offended. He didn't look scared either. "Yes," he replied. The manager folded his arms, his lips tight with irritation. "Are you actually ordering something, or are you just standing there?" The cashier glanced nervously between them. She had already rung up the order. The receipt was right there. "I already paid," the man said, tapping the counter lightly. "Coffee?" "Black." The manager scoffed. "We've had issues lately," he said, gesturing vaguely around the cafe. "People loitering. Making customers uncomfortable." The words hung heavy in the air. No one missed what he meant. A few customers shifted in their seats. A young woman near the door suddenly lifted her phone, pretending to text while angling the camera toward the counter. Something about the exchange didn't sit right. "I'm just waiting for my drink," the man said evenly. The manager leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening rather than loud. "Next time, make sure you belong before you walk into places like this." The cashier's hands trembled as she passed the cup across the counter. "Here you go, sir," she whispered. The man accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." He turned to leave, moving toward the door without another word. That should have been the end of it. Most people would have let it go. Most people would have swallowed the humiliation and walked away. But the manager couldn't resist. "Yeah," he said loudly, making sure the whole cafe heard him, "and don't come back causing trouble. Know your place." The cafe fell silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to pause. The man stopped just short of the door. His hand rested on the handle. For a brief moment, everyone waited, some expecting anger, others hoping for it. They wanted a scene. A justification. Something to make the disrespect feel earned. Instead, the man turned around. His face was calm. Too calm. He looked directly at the manager, then slowly scanned the room. He saw the phones half raised. The uncomfortable stares. The people pretending not to watch. Finally, his eyes returned to the manager. "I hope you have a good day," he said. That was it. No insults. No raised voice. No threat. Just a quiet sentence delivered with unsettling composure. He opened the door and stepped outside, the bell chiming softly behind him. Inside, the cafe slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed, though more subdued. The manager scoffed and shook his head, muttering something under his breath as he walked away. To him, it was nothing more than a moment of authority exercised. Another person put in their place. But across the room, the woman with the phone replayed the video she'd just recorded. She frowned. Something about the man's reaction bothered her. People who were powerless usually reacted one of two ways: anger or shame. He had shown neither. His calm wasn't defeat. It was control. Outside, the man stood on the sidewalk, steam rising from the lid of his coffee cup into the cold morning air. Cars passed. People hurried by. The world moved on as if nothing had happened. He took a slow sip. Then he smiled, not because he found it funny, and not because he was unaffected, but because he understood something the manager didn't. Disrespect always feels small in the moment, until it meets consequences. And this story, whether they knew it or not, had only just begun. The man didn't drive away right after leaving the cafe. He sat in his car with the engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, the coffee cup still warm in the holder beside him. Through the windshield, he could see the cafe door swing open and closed as customers came and went, laughing, talking, living their ordinary lives. To them, what had just happened was already fading. To him, it was settled but not forgotten. He closed his eyes for a brief moment and exhaled slowly. Not in frustration. Not in anger. It was the kind of breath someone takes when they're making a decision they've made many times before. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The cover was plain, the edges softened by years of use. Inside were pages filled with short sentences, dates, and observations, nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Just truth. He flipped to a blank page and wrote carefully. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. He paused, then added another line beneath it. But silence remembers. Across the street, the woman from the cafe stood pretending to wait for a ride-share. In reality, she was watching him. She had filmed the incident on instinct, the way people did now when something felt wrong but they weren't sure why. She expected him to explode. To argue. To demand respect. Instead, he had walked away with a calm that unsettled her. Now she watched as he sat quietly, wrote something down, and then closed the notebook with intention. There was no shaking, no pacing, no visible frustration. That's not normal, she murmured to herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from a friend. Did you see that? She typed back, yeah. I recorded it. She hesitated before adding, something feels off. Inside the cafe, the manager leaned against the counter, laughing with another employee. People are so sensitive these days, he said, rolling his eyes. You say one thing and suddenly you're the bad guy. The employee forced a smile. He had seen the way the room went quiet. He had felt the tension. But he said nothing. Silence was safer. The manager had already forgotten the man's face. Outside, the man finally started the car and pulled into traffic. He drove without music, without urgency. His phone buzzed once on the passenger seat. He ignored it. At a red light, he glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The calm expression hadn't changed. It rarely did. Life had taught him early that reacting emotionally to disrespect only fed the people who delivered it. Years ago, he had learned a different rule. Let actions speak where words are wasted. The light turned green. He drove across town to a quiet office building that blended in with its surroundings: glass, steel, no bold signs. Inside, the receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. Good morning, sir. Good morning, he replied. She handed him a folder. They're waiting for you upstairs. He nodded and stepped into the elevator alone. As the doors closed, his phone buzzed again. This time, he picked it up. A message from his assistant. Saw the video. Do you want me to handle it? He stared at the screen for a long moment. No, he typed back. Not yet. The elevator hummed softly as it rose. His reflection stared back at him in the mirrored walls, composed, unreadable. By the time he reached the top floor, the incident in the cafe felt distant, almost small. Not because it didn't matter, but because he understood its place. Moments like that were never isolated. They were symptoms. And symptoms always pointed to something deeper. Back across town, the woman uploaded the video to her private account, unsure what she would do with it. Comments began to appear almost immediately. That was messed up. Why do managers always think they can talk like that? The guy handled it with class. She watched the clip again, this time focusing not on the manager, but on the man walking away. There was no defeat in his stride. There was certainty. She didn't know why, but a strange thought crossed her mind. That man is coming back. She didn't know when. She didn't know how. She only knew that silence like his wasn't the end of a story. It was the pause before everything changed. The cafe had never been this clean. Every table was wiped twice. Chairs were perfectly aligned. The pastry case gleamed under freshly adjusted lights. Even the chalkboard menu had been rewritten in careful, rounded letters, the kind meant to look welcoming rather than rushed. The manager stood near the counter, smoothing his shirt for the third time in 5 minutes. They should be here any minute, he said, forcing a smile at the staff. Remember, be professional. No one asked who they were. Everyone knew. 3 days earlier, an email had arrived from corporate with a subject line that caused instant panic. Regional partnership visit, mandatory attendance. No details. No names. Just a time and a warning that this meeting could impact leadership structure. The manager laughed it off in front of everyone, but behind closed doors, his confidence had cracked. Corporate visits didn't happen without reason. The bell above the door chimed. 2 men in tailored suits entered first, scanning the room with quiet focus. Then the owner himself stepped in, speaking animatedly as he turned back toward the entrance. And then the manager saw him. The same black man from 3 days ago. For half a second, the manager's mind refused to connect the image to reality. The clothes were different: sharp suit, polished shoes, watch that caught the light, but the posture was unmistakable. The calm. The steady eyes. His stomach dropped. The man met his gaze briefly. There was no recognition in his expression. No smirk. No satisfaction. Just professionalism. This way, the owner said warmly, guiding the group toward the center of the cafe. Everyone, thank you for being here. The staff gathered, whispering nervously. The cashier from the incident felt her heart pound. She recognized him immediately. It's him, she thought. It's really him. The owner cleared his throat. As you know, we've been in discussions about expanding our regional footprint. Today, I'm proud to introduce a new partner who will be playing a major role in that future. The man stepped forward. My name is Daniel Carter, he said calmly. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here. His voice was measured, confident, carrying without effort. The manager's face had gone pale. The owner continued, unaware or pretending to be unaware of the tension. Daniel has just acquired a majority stake in several locations, including this one. Effective immediately, he'll be overseeing operational standards and leadership development. A heavy silence followed. The words echoed in the manager's ears, majority stake, this one. Daniel's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking everything in. The staff. The layout. The energy. Then, almost casually, his gaze landed on the manager. Recognition flickered, brief but undeniable. The manager swallowed hard and stepped forward, forcing a laugh. Well, welcome. We're honored to have you. Daniel nodded politely. Thank you. There was no accusation in his tone. No edge. That made it worse. The owner clapped his hands together. Why don't we sit down and discuss next steps? As chairs were pulled out, the manager leaned closer to Daniel, his voice low. I don't know if you remember me, but there may have been a misunderstanding the other day. Daniel looked at him fully now. I remember, he said simply. The manager rushed on, words tumbling over each other. If I offended you in any way, that wasn't my intention. We're under a lot of pressure here, and... Daniel raised a hand. Let's talk about it later, he said calmly. Right now, I want to observe. They took their seats. Throughout the meeting, Daniel asked thoughtful questions. Not about profits first, but about staff turnover, customer complaints, training procedures. The manager answered when spoken to, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be found. At one point, Daniel glanced toward the counter. The cashier met his eyes, unsure what to do. He gave her a small nod. It was then she understood something important. This wasn't about revenge. This was about accountability. When the meeting ended, Daniel stood. I'd like a private word with the owner, he said. Then, after a brief pause, and the manager. The manager's legs felt heavy as he followed them toward the back office. The door closed behind them, sealing the room in silence. Out front, the staff exchanged nervous glances. No one knew what was being said behind that door. But everyone could feel it. The balance of power had shifted. And the man who had once been told to know his place had just redefined it. The back office was small, windowless, and suffocatingly warm. The owner sat behind his desk, fidgeting with a pen, while the manager hovered near the door, shifting from foot to foot. Daniel stood opposite them, calm, composed, the very picture of control. The manager swallowed hard. I just want to apologize. Whatever happened the other day, it wasn't meant to be personal. Daniel raised a hand, cutting him off. His voice was quiet but carried a weight that made every word feel like a hammer striking metal. Don't, he said. I don't need an apology. The manager blinked, confused. You don't. No. You already revealed who you are in that moment. You don't need to tell me anything more. Actions have consequences. Words alone are cheap. The manager opened his mouth, searching for something to say, but no words came. Daniel's eyes scanned the room. Calm, steady, and yet piercing like a lens that saw through everything. I've observed this location for the past few days, Daniel continued. I've looked at your operations, your staff, your training methods. And I've made a decision. The manager shifted uneasily. A decision? Yes. Daniel's tone softened slightly, though it was no less firm. Effective immediately, I want to implement leadership retraining. And I want a new management structure in place. The manager's throat went dry. You're saying. You're being removed from this position, Daniel said simply. No anger, no gloating. Just certainty. The words hit harder than the insults from 3 days ago. But I've been here for years, the manager stammered. I've built this cafe. You can't. Daniel shook his head. Years don't excuse actions that harm people. Authority isn't given to you so you can humiliate others. Authority is earned by how you treat those under it, and the world sees more than you think. The owner cleared his throat nervously. Daniel, perhaps. No, Daniel interrupted, firm but composed. There's no negotiation here. The staff's well-being and the company's integrity come first. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. The manager's face had gone pale. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the desk. He wanted to argue, to fight, to defend himself, but the truth in Daniel's words was undeniable. Daniel turned to the owner. I want this implemented by next week. No exceptions. No excuses. And I'll be overseeing it personally. The owner nodded quickly, relief mixed with apprehension on his face. Of course. Absolutely. We'll start immediately. Daniel then looked back at the manager. You have two choices. You can either leave quietly and learn from this, or resist and face the consequences of continued failure. The manager swallowed hard. For a moment, he seemed on the verge of collapse. But then, slowly, he nodded. I understand. I'll leave. Daniel's face softened not with sympathy, but with clarity. Good. Learn from it. That's all anyone can ask. He turned and walked toward the door, the manager staring after him in stunned silence. On the way out, Daniel paused briefly at the cashier's station. The young woman from the incident looked up, nervous. Keep your head high, he said quietly. People notice more than they think. Then he was gone. Outside, the morning sunlight reflected off the glass of the building. Daniel didn't rush. He walked to his car, taking in the quiet streets, the ordinary life continuing around him. Nothing about his day had changed, yet everything had shifted. Power hadn't been shouted or forced. It had been exercised with dignity, with precision, and with a clear understanding of consequences. Back inside, the cafe staff exchanged glances. Whispers began to circulate, filled with disbelief and excitement. He bought the place, one barista murmured. Yeah, and the manager's gone, another added. They looked around at each other, realizing that respect had been restored not by confrontation, not by anger, but by a single person's quiet, unwavering choice to act. Outside, Daniel opened his car door, taking one last look at the cafe. He had made his choice. The manager had made his. And in that moment, everything had begun to change. Because true change rarely comes from shouting. It comes from decisions made with calm, clear authority. And sometimes, from the choice to simply do what is right. Months passed, and the cafe was almost unrecognizable. Not in appearance, though it was cleaner and more polished than ever. The change was in the energy, in the air itself. Customers lingered longer, smiled more, and even the quietest staff members spoke with confidence. Respect had become the foundation, and everyone who walked in could feel it. The manager who had humiliated Daniel was gone. Replaced not just with someone new, but with a system that demanded accountability. Training programs emphasized dignity, fairness, and leadership by example. Mistakes were corrected, not punished, misconduct was addressed immediately. The atmosphere was lighter, warmer, yet structured. Daniel returned one morning, as he often did, walking through the door with his usual calm. The staff greeted him with familiarity, nodding, smiling, sometimes offering coffee without him even asking. He nodded back politely. He found a quiet corner near the window and sat with his own cup of coffee. Outside, the city moved on as usual, oblivious to the ripple his presence had caused in this small corner of it. He didn't mind. He had never been motivated by recognition. A familiar voice called out. "Excuse me, sir." Daniel looked up to see the young woman who had filmed that day he was disrespected. She approached cautiously, a polite smile on her face. I just wanted to thank you," she said. "For the way you handled everything. That day, in the cafe." Daniel smiled gently, taking a slow sip from his cup. "Thank you," he replied. But it wasn't about recognition. It was about making sure the right actions followed the wrong ones. She nodded, sensing the weight of the lesson without fully understanding it. "It just changed how I see things," she admitted. "How people handle themselves. How to respond without losing yourself." Daniel looked out the window, his gaze distant for a moment. "Respect," he said softly, "isn't earned in moments of anger. It's earned in moments of restraint. How you respond when the world tries to knock you down matters more than the world's attempt itself." The woman nodded again, inspired. Then she smiled, almost shyly, and walked away. Daniel returned his focus to his coffee. Inside the cafe, the staff moved efficiently, working in harmony. Customers smiled. Laughter floated over the scent of fresh pastries and roasted coffee beans. Daniel observed quietly, content. Change had come not through loud confrontation, but through quiet authority, thoughtful action, and deliberate choice. And sometimes, change came with no one even realizing it in the moment. Across the room, a young barista spilled coffee on a tray and flinched, expecting anger. Daniel approached, calmly helped her steady the tray, and offered guidance. "You're learning," he said gently. "Mistakes teach more than punishment ever will." The barista nodded, relief flooding her expression. She had expected criticism, but instead found mentorship. She glanced at the other staff members, realizing they too had been shaped by the same principles. Months ago, this cafe had been a place where a single moment of disrespect could humiliate someone completely. Now, it was a place where dignity guided every interaction. Daniel finished his coffee and stood, leaving a tip on the table. He opened the door for a stranger leaving behind him, a small gesture that rippled unnoticed. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place inside that cafe. But those who had been there, who had watched, who had been affected, they carried the lesson forward. Power had never been about revenge, loud words, or authority exercised for self-interest. Power was about restraint. About making the right choice when the wrong had been done. About transforming hurt into something meaningful. As Daniel walked away, his figure blending into the city streets, one truth remained clear. Disrespect could change a moment. But dignity could change everything. And in that quiet victory, the world felt just a little bit better.